wealthy father returned to his country estate early and was brought to his knees by what he found in the backyard. A child's pure alien laughter sliced through the stagnant afternoon heat, gripping Alexander's heart so tightly he thought it might stop beating. His Italian leather briefcase, stuffed with million-dollar contracts and corporate headaches, slipped right out of his hand, slapping against the gravel driveway with a thud he didn't even hear. He was a man trained to analyze spreadsheets and spot liars in boardrooms, yet his brain refused to compute the miracle unfolding on his own manicured lawn. There, bathed in the golden glow of 4 in the afternoon, his son Leo, a boy 5 top specialists swore was emotionally unreachable and severely autistic, was hanging onto a woman's back for dear life. It wasn't his fiancée. It wasn't a nurse with 3 PhDs. It was the housekeeper, a young woman he'd barely acknowledged, wearing a cheap blue uniform and flashy yellow rubber gloves shimmering in the sun. She was crawling on all fours, dirtying her knees on the grass and neighing like a pony. And Leo, his 6-year-old son, who supposedly recoiled at human touch, was buried in the crook of her neck, cackling with joy, arms wide open as if embracing the entire world. Alexander's legs turned to jelly, the breath caught in his throat. How was this even physically possible? Just this morning, Carla, his bride-to-be, had lectured him, with that fake patient tone of hers, that Leo needed stronger sedatives because his aggressive outbursts were becoming unmanageable. She had called the boy a lost cause, a hollow shell that brought them nothing but expense and misery. But the child before him wasn't hollow, he was electric, vibrant, and radiantly happy. He took a shaky step onto the grass, feeling the earth sway beneath him. The sight was a beautiful nightmare, mesmerizing yet agonizing. Elena, the maid, paused to catch her breath. Instead of pushing the boy away with clinical coldness, she turned and nuzzled his ribs playfully with her nose. Leo erupted into a fresh wave of giggles, a melody Alexander hadn't heard since before the car crash took his first wife 4 years ago. 4 years of dead silence. 4 years of blank stares and rigid limbs. And now, a cleaner in dishwashing gloves had unlocked his son in 20 minutes, achieving what Europe's finest doctors failed to do in a lifetime. A storm of icy rage and burning hope collided in the millionaire's chest. Someone had been feeding him lies, and the truth was right there, laughing on the turf. Hit a subscribe to find out how this single moment unraveled a web of deceit that would shatter their reality forever. Alexander started walking again, this time with purpose, though his mind was a whirlwind. Every step toward them destroyed the false narrative he'd been sold about his own child. Leo wasn't staring into the void. His brown eyes, identical to his late mother's, were locked onto Elena's face with absolute, unadulterated adoration. The stiffness was gone too. The red wheelchair sat empty yards away, a forgotten relic and a bad omen left behind. The boy clung to her, his small fingers bunching up the fabric of her blue uniform. Then, leather met lawn. The crunch of Alexander's designer shoes snapped the magical silence. Elena froze mid-motion. Her survival instinct kicked in instantly. She sensed a presence before she saw it, and the radiant smile vanished, draining the color from her face. She whipped her head around to find the master of the house looming over them, a dark silhouette against the sun, fists balled up tight at his sides. She looked absolutely terrified. She knew the protocol. The help was strictly forbidden from interacting with the young heir beyond basic hygiene duties. Carla's orders were explicit. Touch him, and you trigger him. Trigger him, and you're on the street with a blacklisted record. Elena exhaled sharply and tried to gently detach herself from the boy, scrambling back like a criminal caught red-handed, but Leo refused to let go. He let out a distinct human whimper of protest and latched back onto her sleeve, smearing mud on her arm. "Sir, Mr. Alexander," Elena stammered, dropping to her knees but too afraid to stand, her yellow-gloved hands trembling violently against her chest. "I am so sorry, sir. I lost track of time. I had no idea you'd be home this early. Please, don't be mad at him. He was just playing," she stammered. Alejandro didn't say a word. The silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. To Elena, it felt like the calm before the storm, the kind that ends with her on the street without a job. She ducked her head, bracing for the verbal lashing she always got from Miss Carla. She waited for the insults, but the explosion never came. Instead, Alejandro just stared at the boy. Sensing the sudden shift in Elena's mood, Leo's giggles died in his throat. The pure joy on his face vanished, replaced instantly by a look of sharp, watchful anxiety. Then, the impossible happened. The boy dragged himself across the grass, movements strong and deliberate, until he was shielding Elena. He threw his small arms out like a barrier, eyeing his own father like a stranger. Or, worse, an enemy. That look hit Alejandro harder than a physical blow. His son, the boy supposedly void of emotion, was protecting the help from his own flesh and blood. "Stay right there," Alejandro commanded, his voice rasped, sounding foreign even to himself. It wasn't a shout. It was a desperate plea wrapped in the tone of an order. Elena froze, fighting back tears. But Leo held his ground, his brow furrowed in a defiant scowl that Alejandro had never witnessed before. The experts always claimed Leo couldn't distinguish faces, that people were just moving objects to him. But right now, the boy knew exactly who was the danger and who was the sanctuary. Bile rose in Alejandro's throat. A scorching wave of guilt washed over him. Years of travel, endless work to fund treatments, blind faith in Carla and the doctors, it had all cost him this. He was a complete stranger to his own blood. Alejandro slowly lowered himself to the ground, not caring that the knees of his $3,000 suit were soaking up the garden mud. He brought himself eye level with the pair. Elena's breath came in sharp gasps. She smelled of soap and lavender, a simple, comforting scent, worlds apart from the sharp chemical perfumes that usually filled the mansion hallways. "How long?" Alejandro demanded, locking eyes with the young woman. The urgency in his voice was palpable. "Sir?" Elena blinked, confused. She was still expecting a lecture about the dirt on Leo's clothes. "How long has he been able to do that?" Alejandro pointed at Leo, who was now gently stroking the girl's rubber glove, seeking comfort. "The doctors, Carla, everyone told me his muscles had wasted away. They said he couldn't support his own weight, couldn't focus his eyes. They told me laughter was just an involuntary reflex, impossible for someone in his condition. Since when does he laugh like that?" Elena swallowed hard, finally realizing the boss's anger wasn't aimed at her, or at least not for the reasons she feared. She looked down at Leo with pure affection, momentarily forgetting she was speaking to one of the most powerful men in the country. "Since always, sir," she whispered. The words crashed into Alejandro's conscience like a landslide. "Well, at least since I started 6 months ago. He was shy at first, sure, but he's not broken physically, he's just lonely. And terrified." "Terrified." Alejandro repeated the word as if tasting it for the first time. "What does he have to be scared of? He has everything. 24-hour care, the best facilities, top-tier therapy." Elena hesitated. She knew what she was about to say could destroy her career if Miss Carla ever found out. But then she felt Leo's tiny hand squeeze her finger. That small touch gave her all the courage she needed. She looked up, meeting the billionaire's gaze head-on. "He's not afraid of something, sir. He's afraid of someone." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant call of a bird. A cold chill ran down Alejandro's spine, defying the afternoon heat. Suddenly, all the jagged puzzle pieces began to lock into place. The accidental bruises, the crying fits that magically stopped the moment Carla left the room, her obsession with keeping him sedated. It all formed a grotesque picture he had willfully ignored. "Explain yourself," Alejandro said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you better tell me the whole truth, Elena." "He changes the second she walks in," Elena blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "When Miss Carla is home, Leo just shuts down. He goes stiff, squeezes his eyes shut, and stops responding. The doctors only see him like that because she's always in the room during the exams, isn't she? She's always right there, holding his hand or touching his neck." Alejandro's mind flashed back to every medical appointment. Carla playing the role of the saintly stepmother, the devoted partner, constantly stroking the boy's neck, whispering in his ear. "She's always touching his neck," Alejandro realized. A wave of nausea hit him as he recalled an old documentary about pressure points. It seemed impossible, monstrous even. But that laugh? The pure joy he had just heard? That was the only truth in this house. "I need to see it," Alejandro commanded, shooting to his feet with a jolt that made Elena flinch. "You claimed his muscles weren't wasted. Show me his capabilities." "Sir, I'm no specialist, we're just messing around." Elena tried to backpedal, terrified she'd already dug her own grave. "Just do it," he roared. But the moment he saw Leo recoil, his demeanor crumbled. He ran a desperate hand through his graying hair, forcing his voice to drop. "Please, I have to witness this myself. I need proof that I haven't lost my mind, that my boy is actually still in there." Elena gave a slow nod. She wiped her palms on her apron, peeled off the yellow rubber gloves and dropped them onto the lawn, exposing hands that were weathered yet gentle. Turning to the child, her entire vibe shifted. The frightened maid vanished, replaced instantly by a trusted playmate. She began humming a soft tune, a folk lullaby that tugged at the edges of Alejandro's own childhood memories. "Come on now, Leo, the airplane is ready for takeoff," she cooed, spreading her arms wide. Alejandro watched in shock as Leo did more than just crack a smile. The boy planted his palms against the earth, fired up leg muscles that were legally declared dead, and with gritty determination, pushed himself up. He achieved a crawling stance entirely on his own. No assistance, no braces, just sheer, unadulterated willpower. Leo scrambled 2 steps toward Elena, then shot a glance at his father before releasing a throat sound that slowly shaped itself into syllables. Plane. It was clumsy and slurred, but undeniably clear. Alejandro clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle a sob. Mute. The charts said nonverbal. Yet here was his flesh and blood begging to play airplanes. The reality Alejandro had built upon medical files and blind faith in his fiancée shattered right then, exposing a truth that was both miraculous and horrifying. Leo was fine. Someone was intentionally keeping him invalid. "Oh my God," Alejandro whispered, dropping to his knees beside the boy. He reached out a shaking hand to brush his son's cheek. Leo didn't flinch this time, though his eyes darted to Elena for permission. She gave a small, melancholic nod. Alejandro made contact with the warm skin, feeling an electric jolt of connection. But before the miracle could fully sink in, the roar of a high-powered engine echoed from the driveway. A red sports car skidded to a halt, tires screaming against the gravel. Leo's body seized up instantly. The smile evaporated. His shoulders locked and his eyes glazed over, retreating into that vacant 1,000-yard stare Alejandro knew all too well. Elena's face drained of all color. "It's her," the maid whispered, fumbling to snatch her gloves from the ground. "Sir, please, if she catches me playing." Leo's sudden shift was the smoking gun. This wasn't a medical condition. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Alejandro felt a volcanic rage bubbling in his veins, threatening to erupt, but decades in the boardroom had drilled one critical lesson into him. Never strike while your enemy is blind to your presence. He glanced toward the house, hearing the click-clack of Carla's heels in the foyer, then locked eyes with Elena. "Stand up!" Alejandro ordered. His voice turned ice-cold and calculating, the tone he reserved for bankrupting rivals. "Gloves on. Act like nothing happened." Elena stared at him, confused. "Listen to me closely, Elena." Alejandro gripped her shoulders firmly but gently, boring into her eyes. "From this second on, we are allies. No one, absolutely no one, can know what I just witnessed. I'm not going to confront her today. Today, I begin dismantling her life." Alejandro stood up, brushed the dirt from his suit, and cast one final look at his son, who had already reverted to his act. Then, he sprinted toward the side service entrance. "I'll enter through the study. She needs to think I've been working this whole time. When she comes out here, watch her every move, because tonight, the game changes." Hidden behind heavy velvet drapes that smelled of dust and old money, Alejandro watched from the study window. He held his breath like a sniper waiting for the clear shot. His heart hammered against his ribs with painful violence, a dull drumbeat heralding the arrival of the woman he was scheduled to marry in 2 months. The visual contrast was jarring, straight out of a movie. The garden, which moments ago had been a sanctuary of golden light and miracles, seemed to metaphorically darken the second Carla stepped through the French doors. She didn't just walk, she prowled on a runway. Her red stilettos stabbed viciously into the manicured lawn, scarring the earth with every step, a perfect metaphor for what she had done to their lives. She was dressed to kill, sporting designer shades that eclipsed half her face and clutching a handbag worth more than Elena's annual salary. It wasn't her outfit that sent a chill down Alejandro's spine, it was her entire demeanor. Safe within his concealment, he observed the tension radiating from Carla, a stance charged with electric, coiled aggression. She thought she was alone, so the mask slipped. That persona of the devoted, self-sacrificing mother crashed to the pavement the moment she dropped her keys. "What the hell are you doing?" Carla's shriek pierced the soundproof glass of the office, muffled but dripping with unmistakable vitriol. Alejandro watched Elena flinch instantly. A physical recoil, the conditioned response of a woman accustomed to verbal lashings. The housekeeper scrambled to her feet, head bowed low, clutching her hands tightly against her soiled apron. But watching Leo was the real dagger. Just 5 minutes ago, his son was crawling around roaring like an airplane. Now, the boy collapsed inward like a house of cards. His shoulders slumped, arms pinning to his sides in a rigid spasm, while the light vanished from his face, leaving a hollow void. The fish mouth phenomenon, as the specialist called it, that glazed, vacant stare into the abyss. Alejandro gripped the windowsill, the pressure turning his knuckles a stark bone white. That wasn't autism, it was a survival tactic. The boy was playing dead to escape the predator's notice. "Look at him!" Carla shrieked, aiming a perfectly manicured accusatory finger at the child. "He's absolutely disgusting, covered in filth and grass. Do I pay you to let him wallow like an animal, or to keep him pristine?" Elena tried to stammer a silent apology, but Carla bulldozed right over her. She marched toward the boy with sharp, rapid strides. Alejandro fought the visceral urge to shatter the glass and leap into the garden, forcing himself to remain frozen. "Watch her," he commanded himself. "You need to see exactly what she's capable of when she thinks she's unobserved." Carla reached Leo, and instead of kneeling to clean or gently scold him, she snatched his arm. It wasn't a maternal touch, it was a yank. Sharp, callous, and violent. She hoisted the child's arm as if he were a discarded rag doll. Leo offered no protest, no tears. He simply went limp, dangling inertly from her grasp. That utter passivity terrified Alejandro far more than any scream could have. It proved this was routine. It meant Leo had learned the hard way that resistance only brought more pain. "You're useless," Carla hissed, bringing her face inches from the boy's, though Alejandro had to read her lips to catch the full sentence. "I turn my back for 5 minutes and you look like a beggar. If your father sees you like this, he'll think I'm not doing my job. And if he thinks that, the cash flow for your candy stops. Do you understand?" She snatched a handkerchief from her purse and began scrubbing Leo's face aggressively, nearly abrading the skin to remove a smudge of dirt. The boy's head jerked with every harsh motion of her hand. Elena stepped forward, an act of nearly suicidal bravery. "Ma'am, please, you're going to hurt his skin," the housekeeper pleaded, her trembling voice barely reaching the office. Carla spun around with the speed of a viper. "Shut up, you idiot!" she screamed, flinging the soiled cloth into the woman's face. "This is all your fault. Get to the kitchen and prep his drops. Make it a double dose. He's far too agitated because of you. He needs to be asleep before Alejandro arrives. I won't have him seen looking so defective." Double dose. The words echoed in Alejandro's mind like a gunshot. He recalled the monthly pharmacy invoices, broad-spectrum pediatric sedatives. The doctors claimed they were to control his fits of rage. Now he understood those fits were entirely fabricated. The drops weren't meant to calm him. They were meant to extinguish him. They were tools to transform a healthy boy into a silent piece of furniture, ensuring he wouldn't interfere with the future matriarch's plans. Alejandro felt a single scalding tear trace a path down his cheek. Month after month, he had been financing the drugging of his own son. Alejandro backed away from the window, inhaling deeply to steady the tremors in his hands. He had to go out there, had to act, but he couldn't play the part of the enraged father. He needed to be the cold strategist. If he confronted her with shouting now, she would simply weep. She'd claim stress, pin it on Elena, and manipulate the situation exactly as she always did. No, he needed her to dig her own grave perfectly. He loosened his tie and unfastened his top button to feign exhaustion, then opened the office door leading to the interior hallway rather than the garden. He walked heavily toward the main entrance, his shoes clicking deliberately against the marble, broadcasting his arrival as if he had just stepped through the front door. "Carla, I'm home," he called out, his voice a carefully crafted mix of exhaustion and normalcy. The effect in the garden was instantaneous. Through the open living room door, he watched Carla release Leo's arm as if it were searing hot iron. In less than 2 seconds, her entire demeanor underwent a radical transformation. She smoothed her dress, ran a hand through her hair to fix it, and plastered on a dazzling, rehearsed, picture-perfect smile. She dropped into a crouch next to Leo and, with a tenderness that was sickening to watch, began stroking the very cheek she'd been scrubbing raw just seconds before. "Alejandro, darling!" she cried out, spinning toward the house, her eyes lighting up on cue. "What a surprise! You're home so early." Alejandro stepped into the garden, forcing his legs to move slowly, plastering a weary smile on his face while his eyes scanned the scene. Elena stood there looking pale, staring at the grass as she snatched a handkerchief off the ground. Leo was still frozen like a statue, staring at nothing on the horizon. "Meeting wrapped up early," Alejandro lied, leaning in to peck her on the cheek. The scent of Carla's expensive perfume hit him, and he barely fought back the urge to gag. "Wanted to see you guys. How are things? How was the day?" A trap, simple and direct. Carla let out a theatrical sigh, hand flying to her chest, playing the suffering martyr to perfection. "Oh, honey, it's been hell," she said, voice trembling with distress, shooting a look of fake pity at Leo. "The poor thing has been impossible today. Screamed all morning, banged his head against the wall. I actually had to fight him to stop him from hurting himself. The doctors are right. His condition is deteriorating. I barely managed to get him out here for some fresh air a minute ago, but look, zero reaction. He's completely gone." Alejandro felt the blood boiling in his veins. Screamed all morning. Lie. Elena had told him they were playing. Banged his head. Lie. Not a mark on him. Deteriorating. The biggest lie of all. "Is that so?" Alejandro asked, crouching down to Leo's level. The boy didn't look at him. He could feel Carla's presence looming over them like a toxic shadow. "Poor baby. He looks drained." "He is," Carla insisted, clamping a possessive hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. Alejandro caught the tiny, almost invisible wince of pain on Leo's face. "I told Elena to get his meds. He needs rest, babe. Maybe we should finally look into that facility in Zurich that Dr. Vales mentioned. I know it's expensive and far away, but I'm running on empty here. I'm worried about his safety." There it was, the master plan. Ship the kid off, erase the problem forever, and keep the millionaire and his fortune all to herself. Alejandro glanced at Elena. The maid looked up for a split second, eyes wide with panic, silently begging him not to buy the lies. Alejandro held her gaze, a silent message. "I see you. I believe you." "No," Alejandro said, standing up and dusting off his knees. His voice was steel, cutting through the air. "We aren't sending him anywhere just yet. Actually, I want to spend the afternoon with him." Carla's face tightened, a barely noticeable twitch. "But honey, he's in crisis. It could be dangerous. You know how aggressive he gets." She tried to talk him out of it, stepping between father and son to block the way. "I don't care." Alejandro sidestepped her and looked at the maid. "Elena, forget the drops. Bring some orange juice and stay here. I want you present too. Leo seems comfortable around you." Carla let out a nervous, disbelief-filled laugh. "Elena, please, honey. She's just the cleaning lady. Leo doesn't even know she exists. She's furniture to him. Besides, she has plenty to do inside. The house is a disaster." "The house can wait," Alejandro snapped, letting his boardroom authority bleed into his tone. He locked eyes with Carla, openly challenging her for the first time in years. "I noticed something weird, Carla." The silence grew heavy. Carla blinked, her smile faltering. "Weird? What do you mean?" "When I walked in..." Alejandro paused deliberately, savoring the flash of fear in her eyes. "I could have sworn I heard laughing, a child's laughter." Carla went rigid. Her calculating mind raced at a mile a minute. "Oh, that," she said quickly, recovering her mask. "Must have been the neighbor's kids. The wind carries the sound. Leo hasn't laughed in years. Don't torture yourself with false hope, Alejandro. His brain doesn't work that way." "Maybe," Alejandro said, turning to his son. He leaned in, breaking every rule Carla had imposed, and scooped Leo up into his arms. The boy went stiff as a board, bracing for a scolding or a hit, but Alejandro just held him tight. He pressed the boy to his chest, whispering right into his ear so only he could hear, ignoring the woman glaring daggers at them. "Airplane," Alejandro whispered. "Dad's here. The plane is taking off, champion." He felt Leo's small body shudder against him, and then, slowly, almost invisibly, a tiny hand came up to rest on the shoulder of Alejandro's expensive suit. It wasn't a full hug, but it was a response. Proof of life. "We're going inside," Alejandro announced, his voice carrying clearly as he strode toward the house with his son cradled in his arms, leaving Carla stranded in the garden, her jaw slack with shock. "Elena, with us. Now." Carla stayed behind, watching their retreating figures with cold calculation. For the first time, she could feel the reins slipping through her fingers. And Alejandro, marching toward the mansion that had morphed into a penitentiary, made a silent vow. No sleep tonight until he found that vial of pills and installed the hidden cameras he had planned. War had been declared. The atmosphere inside the estate was unbreathable, a toxic cocktail of sterile opulence and screaming silence. Alejandro crossed the threshold of the main foyer, clutching Leo tight, feeling how the boy's body was a rigid block of ice against his chest. Behind him, the sharp click of Carla's heels echoed off the Italian marble like gunshots, a rhythmic reminder of the predator snapping at his heels. Elena slipped in last, easing the door shut with the terrified gentleness of someone trying to be invisible, pressing herself against the wall as if hoping to merge with the wallpaper. "Get him to his room, immediately, Alejandro," Carla commanded, her voice snapping back into that authoritative tone thinly veiled as medical concern. "He is severely overstimulated. Look at him shaking. That little excursion to the garden was a disaster. Elena, move. Go to the kitchen. Fetch the Quiet Nights vial and the fresh dropper. The boy smashed the other one yesterday during one of his hysterical fits." Alejandro ascended the stairs, tasting bile at the back of his throat. Hysterical fits. He knew it was all a lie now, but he had to witness the depth of the charade. He stepped into Leo's room, a space that resembled a sterile clinic more than a child's sanctuary. Stark white walls, child-proofed furniture with rounded edges, toys locked away in glass display cases, and the lingering stench of antiseptic. He lowered Leo onto the bed with infinite gentleness. The boy didn't stir. He just lay there, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, his breathing shallow and rapid. The look in his eyes was one of absolute, unadulterated terror. Then Carla swept in like a hurricane, sucking the air out of the room. "Step out, darling," she said, nudging Alejandro toward the door. "You know you can't handle watching him take his drops. He gets difficult and it just breaks your heart. Let me handle it. It's my burden to bear for you." "No," Alejandro said, planting his feet firmly in the doorway. His shadow cast a long silhouette over the bed. "I'm staying. I want to learn. If we're going to be husband and wife, I need to know exactly how to care for my son." A flicker of irritation sparked in Carla's eyes, but she instantly smothered it beneath a mask of melancholic patience. Elena appeared in the doorway clutching a silver tray. Her hands were trembling so violently that the tinted glass vial chattered against the metal. "Give it here." Carla snatched the vial from Elena's grip with jarring force. What happened next burned itself into Alejandro's memory like a scene from a horror film. Gone was the sweetness. No lullabies, no patience. She clamped one hand around Leo's jaw, squeezing his cheeks hard enough to force his mouth open. Leo tried to twist away, letting out a strangled whimper, his little eyes darting desperately toward Elena in the doorway. "Hold still, damn it!" Carla hissed, momentarily forgetting Alejandro's presence, or perhaps arrogant enough to believe he'd mistake her cruelty for necessary discipline. She jammed the dropper into his mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4 doses. The thick, yellowish sludge disappeared down the child's throat. Leo gagged, his small frame shuddering with the effort, but he swallowed it down. The reaction was almost instantaneous, far too fast to be natural. Within seconds, the tension in Leo's muscles evaporated, replaced by an eerie, boneless limpness. His eyelids drooped heavily. The light behind his eyes was snuffed out. He didn't fall asleep. He shut down. It was as if someone had severed a puppet's strings. "See?" Carla said, wiping a stray drop of liquid from her finger and capping the vial. "It's for his own good. Without this, he'd hurt himself. Now he'll sleep for 12 hours straight. Peace for him, peace for us." Alejandro stared at his son, who now lay with his mouth slack and slightly open, drooling, reduced to the vegetable the doctors had always claimed he was. A murderous impulse surged through him. He wanted to wrap his hands around Carla's throat and hurl her through the window. Instead, he gripped the doorframe until the wood groaned under his fingers. He couldn't save him today. He had to save him for good, and for that, he needed undeniable proof. He needed the world to see the monster she truly was. "You're right, darling," Alejandro lied, his voice devoid of life. "You have a gift with him. I don't know what I'd do without you." Carla smiled, a flash of victory, and slipped the vial into her pocket instead of leaving it on the nightstand. "Let's go downstairs. Elena will keep watch. You and I need a glass of wine. I'm completely drained." As they walked out, Alejandro glanced back for a split second. Elena stood at the foot of the bed, weeping in silence. Alejandro gave her a nod, barely perceptible, but enough. "Hang in there." The early hours rolled in, bringing a silence so heavy it felt like a tomb. The estate was asleep, or so it pretended. Carla was passed out in the master suite, lightly snoring away 2 glasses of Chardonnay and the smug satisfaction of having managed the crisis. But Alejandro? Wide awake, dressed in blackout gear, he drifted through the hallways of his own home like a phantom. He had held his fire until 3 a.m. to trigger phase 1 of the operation. Slipping into his study, he cracked the safe concealed behind a canvas. He ignored the cash. Instead, he grabbed a sleek black case, tools usually reserved for corporate espionage. high-definition button cams, real-time cloud uplink. The works. First stop, Leo's bedroom. The hinge gave a faint whine, but the boy didn't stir. The sedatives saw to that. Seeing his son in a chemical coma felt like a knife to the gut, but Alejandro buried the hurt. He needed cold precision now. He worked fast. One lens went into the glass eye of a teddy bear perched on a high shelf. He tucked another inside the ceiling smoke detector. A third unit, equipped with a high-gain microphone, slid quietly behind the drapes, angled right at the bed. Moving downstairs, he rigged the main hall and the garden. Lamps, picture frames. Nothing was safe. He planted a critical unit in the kitchen, ground zero for Elena and Carla's interactions. Every angle covered. Every lie would be captured in 4K resolution. On his way back up, he detoured through the hallway bath. Carla had a habit of stashing things there. He opened the cabinet with the steady hands of a surgeon. Way in the back, obscured by $500 face creams, sat an empty vial of Leo's medication. She hadn't tossed it. Using a handkerchief to avoid prints, Alejandro bagged it in a Ziploc. It was going straight to a private lab at first light. He had to know exactly what kind of poison was coursing through his son's veins. By the time the sun started bleeding a pale gray into the sky, Alejandro had transformed. Sharp business suit, suitcase packed by the door. His expression was a wall of executive ice. He headed to the kitchen. Elena was already there, brewing coffee, eyes puffy from a sleepless night. "Good morning," he murmured. She jumped, nearly dropping the pot. "Sir, morning." Alejandro stepped closer. The room was clear. "Carla is still asleep. Listen to me closely, Elena. In 10 minutes, I'm going to tell her I'm leaving on a trip. Urgent business in London, 3 days." Elena's eyes went wide with terror. "You're leaving me alone with her? Sir, please." She was furious yesterday. "If you leave, I can't." He cut her off, gripping her hands firmly. "It's a trap, Elena. I'm driving out the gate, doubling back and hiding in the abandoned guest house at the edge of the property. I've wired the entire mansion. I'll be watching everything from my laptop." The trembling stopped. She stared at him, stunned. "Cameras?" "Yes, I need her to get sloppy. I need her to show her true colors on tape so the police can drag her away. It's the only way to keep her away from Leo forever. But I need you. You have to hold the line. It's going to be hell. She'll think I'm gone and she will unleash on you. Can you take it?" Poor Leo. The simple girl with the yellow cleaning gloves straightened her posture. A fierce resolve burned in her eyes, a look no housekeeper should ever have to wear. "For Leo, sir. I'll take anything." "Good." Footsteps overhead. "She's coming. Remember, I have to sell this. If I snap at you or ignore you, it's just part of the script. Don't forget." Carla drifted into the kitchen wrapped in silk, yawning with theatrical elegance. "Alejandro, what's with the luggage in the hall?" Her gaze flicked from the bag to him, sharpening with suspicion. "Crisis with the Japanese investors," Alejandro lied, nailing the tone of frustrated executive. "I have to fly to London for an emergency video conference and sign the new contracts. I'm leaving right now. The jet is fueled up." He caught the exact second Carla's eyes lit up. It wasn't sadness, it was pure relief. The anticipation of being off the leash. "London," she cooed, moving in for a hug to hide the smirk buried in his shoulder. "Oh, darling, that's awful. I thought we'd finally have some peace, but I understand. Duty calls." "I'll be back in 3 days, maybe 4, he added, giving her enough rope to hang herself. "Watch over Leo. I'm trusting you." "I'll care for him like he's my own," she replied. The lie hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Alejandro grabbed his handle and marched toward the door without looking back. He knew he was leaving his son in the wolf's den, but he also knew the hunter would be waiting in the shadows. The moment his engine faded down the driveway, Carla spun toward Elena. The perfect wife smile melted away like wax in a fire, revealing the cruel sneer hiding underneath. "Fine, you idiot," Carla snapped, whipping out her mobile. "The boss is gone, which means today is all about me. Scrub the main hall and go grab the vintage reds from the cellar. I'm having the girls over. As for the brat, lock him in the basement. I won't have his screaming ruining my evening." The air inside the guest house felt heavy and stale, thick with the scent of rotting timber and neglect, a violent contrast to the crisp, air-conditioned breeze of the main mansion just 200 meters away. Alejandro kept the room pitch black. He couldn't risk even a single flicker giving away his position. He settled into an ancient wicker chair that groaned under his weight, his face washed in the ghostly blue glow of his laptop screen. His eyes, bloodshot and stinging from refusing to blink, were locked onto the grid of live feeds streaming from the hidden cameras. What he saw was a personalized form of torture designed to shred his soul, yet he couldn't tear his gaze away. He was the silent witness to his own nightmare. On the top left quadrant, the kitchen feed focused on Elena. The young woman was weeping, but silently, a terrifying resignation born from learning that making a sound only invites more pain. She was cradling Leo in her arms. The boy was completely limp, knocked out by the heavy dose of sedatives Carla had forced on him. His head lolled backward, swaying dangerously with every step Elena took. He looked like a tiny corpse. An electric jolt of rage shot through Alejandro, a primal, savage urge to storm in, kick down the door, and kill them all with his bare hands. It burned in his gut like fire, but he forced himself to stay put. He gripped the edge of the desk so hard that the old wood began to splinter under his fingernails. "Not yet," he chanted in his mind, biting his lip until the metallic tang of blood filled his mouth. "I need her to do it. I need the final crime caught on tape." "To the basement," I said. Carla's voice, picked up by the bug hidden in the chandelier, sounded tinny and distorted, yet the cruelty cut through crystal clear. On screen, Carla loomed behind Elena, jabbing a finger into her back, herding her forward like livestock. She held a glass of wine, moving with an obscene lightness, humming some pop song as if she hadn't a care in the world. "Madam, please, it's so damp down there," Elena pleaded, freezing in front of the heavy wooden door that led into the darkness. "The boy, his lungs are too weak." "I don't give a damn about his lungs. If he freezes, so be it." Carla exploded, her beautiful face twisting into a mask of rage on the monitor. "Do you honestly think I'm going to let my guests see that drooling freak on my sofa? This is a high-class event, Elena, not a charity ward. Throw him inside, shut the door, and get upstairs to prep the hors d'oeuvres. And if you dare open that door before I say so, I swear I'll have you framed for theft. I seem to have misplaced a gold watch, you know. Would be a terrible shame if the police found it in your purse." The threat was explicit. Prison. Elena hung her head in defeat. Alejandro watched the housekeeper pull open the basement door. The camera angle didn't cover the stairs, but the microphone picked up the heavy thud of footsteps. Descending into the blackness. A minute later, Elena emerged alone, empty-handed, her face streaming with tears. Carla locked the door, tucked the key into her cleavage, and flashed a triumphant, satisfied smirk. "There, problem solved. Now, get to cleaning. I want this kitchen spotless." Alejandro squeezed his eyes shut, a wave of deep, sickening nausea rolling over him. His son, his little Leo, locked away like a stray animal in a dusty, damp cellar, drugged out of his mind and completely helpless. The helplessness felt like venom coursing through his veins, only to be snapped by a ping from his phone. An urgent email. It was from Dr. Salazar, the head of the private laboratory, where he'd sent the samples via courier just that morning. The subject line read, "Toxicology report, critical urgency." Alejandro tapped the file, his fingers trembling. He didn't need a medical degree to understand the angry red bars spiking across the chart. Patient, Leo, age 6. Samples, vial residue and handkerchief saliva. Findings, positive for clinophenol and diazepam at concentrations 3 times the safe limit for a full-grown adult. Traces of central nervous system suppressants detected, strictly non-approved for pediatric use. Note: continued exposure to this cocktail causes not only temporary motor paralysis and catatonia, but is currently generating cumulative neurological damage. At these dosage levels, the probability of respiratory failure during sleep is 80%. Alejandro let the phone clatter onto the desk. This wasn't just abuse, it wasn't just negligence, it was murder in slow motion. Carla wasn't just controlling Leo, she was slowly extinguishing his life force, frying his cognitive functions and suffocating him to ensure that if he survived, he'd be too broken to ever claim his inheritance or speak the truth. The very woman sharing his bed, masquerading as his soulmate, was systematically murdering his boy. His calculating business veneer cracked and vanished, replaced entirely by a primal, paternal rage. Glaring at the feed, Alejandro watched Carla pour herself yet another glass of vintage red, chuckling to herself in the empty kitchen. He held the lab reports proving the poisoning, and now the footage of the imprisonment. It was ample evidence to lock her away for a decade, but jail felt too merciful. He craved total annihilation. He needed her social circle, that elite crowd she desperately tried to impress, to witness the creature lurking beneath her polished skin. Only a scorched earth public shaming would suffice, ensuring she had no dark corner left to crawl into. A glance at the time showed 7 in the evening. The parade of visitors would be pulling up any second now. As the festivities kicked off, Alejandro sat in his shadowed command center, ready to conduct the upcoming symphony of destruction. Darkness draped over the estate, a thick veil masking the rot inside with impeccable landscaping and expensive mood lighting. On his display, Alejandro observed the exterior of his home undergoing a metamorphosis. Carla had triggered the exterior illumination, crafting an ambiance of pure storybook magic that clashed violently with the nightmare unfolding in the cellar. The initial wave of high-end vehicles began gliding up the driveway. German luxury sedans and convertibles arrived, delivering women dressed for a black-tie fundraiser, completely unaware they were stepping onto an active crime scene. Soft ambient beats started bleeding through the living room audio bugs. Alejandro cranked his headset volume to max. Every syllable mattered. Every whisper was fresh gunpowder for his weapon. Carla greeted her clique at the entrance, performing elaborate theatrical hugs and air kisses that carefully avoided actual contact. "Ladies, welcome. Come on in," Carla chirped, looking stunning in emerald silk. "We have the place entirely to ourselves. The bankroll is off in London earning our keep, and the baggage is in storage." "Baggage?" inquired a blonde, dripping in excessive gold, giggling maliciously as she snatched a flute of bubbly from Elena's tray. "You know, the kid," Carla whispered, leaning in like a co-conspirator as they strolled toward the lounge. "He was absolutely manic today, screaming, slobbering, just a total mess. I had to dose him with his special cocktail and stash him away. Honestly, none of you understand the burden I carry. It's like living with a wounded stray dog. But hey, Alejandro's guilt makes for excellent financial perks." She swept her arm across the room, showing off the remodeling, the designer furniture, and the massive diamonds around her neck. The women cackled, a pack of silk-draped hyenas. "St. Carla," a tall brunette declared. "I'd have shipped him off to some state facility and tossed the key. How do you cope?" "Patience, darling. That and a solid game plan," Carla said, winking directly at the hidden lens in the painting, oblivious that her fiancé was capturing every frame of her admission. "Once the ring is on and Alejandro hands over full access to the medical trust fund, let's just say Leo will be relocated to a better climate in Switzerland. Somewhere remote, incredibly cheap, but with very expensive-looking invoices." Alejandro felt the blood pounding against his temples like a sledgehammer. She had just handed him everything: financial schemes, fraud, premeditated intent. He could dial 911 right now and end it. Or he could storm in there armed, but his eyes drifted to the bottom right feed. The cellar. Pitch black down there, but the infrared cut through the darkness, rendering a grainy, ghostly green nightmare. Leo was stirring. The drugs were wearing off prematurely. Maybe it was the spike of terror-induced adrenaline, or maybe his small body was building a tolerance to the poison. The boy sat on a musty mattress usually reserved for winter storage, clutching his knees and rocking back and forth in a frenzy. Leaning into the monitor, Alejandro traced the sheer panic in his son's eyes, glowing in the night vision like a frightened animal. Leo stared up at the locked door atop the stairs, and then did something that shattered Alejandro's soul. He started hammering his fists against the floorboards, but completely soundlessly. He mouthed the word "Dad" in a silent scream, too terrified that the witch upstairs might hear him if he made a noise. Upstairs, the soiree was in full swing, the bass thumping louder now. Elena weaved through the crowd with hors d'oeuvres, treated by the guests as part of the upholstery. But Alejandro spotted a shift in the maid's demeanor. She wasn't watching the socialites. Her eyes were darting between the clock and the cellar door. Every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready to snap. While Carla held court with some endless story about her Paris getaway, Elena quietly ditched the tray and slipped into the shadows of the kitchen. Alejandro hammered the keyboard to switch video feeds. On screen, he watched her tearing through the drawers in a blind panic. She wasn't scavenging for snacks. She needed steel. A screwdriver, a blade, anything sturdy enough to jimmy a lock. "Don't do it, Elena. She'll kill you," Alejandro whispered to the monitor, his pulse hammering against his ribs. If Carla caught her tampering with that door, the retaliation wouldn't be verbal. It would be brutal. Yet, Elena didn't hesitate. Snatching a dull butter knife from the pile, she rushed the basement entrance, jamming the tip into the keyhole with shaking hands. The metal scraped against metal, a soft sound, but in that dead silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Click. But that snap didn't come from the lock. It came from the archway behind her. "And just what do you think you're doing, you little snake?" On the screen, Alejandro watched Carla step into the frame, her face twisted into something barely recognizable and utterly malicious. She'd been tracking the maid the whole time. Elena's fingers went numb, and the knife clattered to the tiles, echoing like a thunderclap. "Ma'am, please, I heard something," Elena stammered. "I thought the boy fell down the stairs." She stumbled backward until her spine hit the basement wood, shielding it with her own body. "You thought? You aren't paid to think, you're paid to obey." Carla hissed the words, stalking forward with her wine glass gripped tight. The veneer of sophisticated hostess was gone. She was just a wolf cornering a lamb now. "I gave you one simple rule about that door, and I told you exactly what happens if you break it. You think you can cross me under my own roof?" "He's awake, ma'am." Elena's voice suddenly found its strength. It wasn't a scream, but the sheer conviction in her tone actually made Carla pause. "He's terrified down there. He's just a little boy. Leaving a child in the dark like that? It's cruel. It's inhuman." "Inhuman?" Carla let out a high, sharp laugh that would freeze water. "Inhuman is being saddled with a burden that has zero value to anyone. He's a genetic mistake, and you're a hiring mistake. Lucky for me, I can fix both problems tonight." Carla raised her arm, but not for a slap. On the monitor, Alejandro caught the glint of the crystal stemware. She was going to use the glass as a weapon. She was aiming to maim. Alejandro didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't plan. He launched himself out of the guest house like a heat-seeking missile, leaving the door wide open and the laptop glowing. He tore across the darkened lawn, vaulting over hedges and ignoring the burning fire in his lungs, driven by one singular obsession: get there before his kitchen floor turned red. Mid-stride, he ripped his phone out and hit speed dial. "Security! Lockdown! Now! Seal the perimeter. Nobody leaves this property. I repeat, nobody. Initiate red protocol." He hit the back terrace a split second later. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, he saw the socialites sipping cocktails, completely oblivious to the brutality unfolding just a few rooms away. He didn't bother with the handle. He grabbed a heavy wrought-iron patio chair and hurled it with every ounce of his rage into the tempered glass. The collision was deafening, a shattering explosion that drowned out the jazz and the laughter instantly. It sounded like Judgment Day had just crashed the party. Screams erupted as the women ducked for cover, shielding themselves from the shower of diamonds raining down on the Persian rug. Alejandro stepped through the jagged breach, blood dripping from his knuckles, looking like a man possessed. Part lunatic, part executioner. Carla's friends stood frozen, drinks halfway to their lips. "Alejandro!" one of them shrieked. "Oh my God, what's happening?" He ignored them, tearing through the living room like a hurricane, overturning a side table as he stormed straight toward the kitchen. He burst in to find Carla gripping Elena's hair, the wine glass raised high for the killing strike. "Let her go!" Alejandro roared. The sound was so primal it seemed to shake the foundation. Carla spun around, startled, and the glass slipped from her grip to shatter against the tiles. In a heartbeat, her face drained of color, shifting from flushed rage to the pale mask of absolute dread. She stared at Alejandro, covered in debris, hand dripping blood, chest heaving, and realized the man standing there wasn't her fiancé anymore. He was her reckoning. The silence that filled the room was heavier and more suffocating than the crash of the window. Inside that kitchen, time seemingly ground to a halt, trapped in a bubble of suffocating pressure. Carla stood with her arms still raised, staring at him like he was a ghost that had just crawled out of a fresh grave. Her face, usually a flawless mask of expensive foundation, started to crack, exposing the raw, pulsing terror underneath. Elena, curled up against the basement door, sobbed silently. Her eyes were wide, mind unable to grasp that the boss was standing here, bloody and enraged, instead of on a flight to London. "Alejandro, baby," Carla started, her voice trembling. Her voice wavered, a pathetic attempt to claw back that sugary sweetness she usually faked so well. She lowered her hand, plastering on a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "My God, you startled me. Why did you burst in like that, and look at your hand, are you hurt?" She stepped closer, arms open as if to hug him, desperately trying to rewrite the script, to spin this scene of domestic violence into an unfortunate little misunderstanding. "Stay back," Alejandro said. He didn't shout. It was a low, feral growl, dripping with such genuine menace that Carla froze, nearly tripping over her own heels. "Take one more step, Carla, and I swear I'll forget I'm a gentleman." The color drained from Carla's face. She glanced toward the living room, where her friends were clustered in the kitchen doorway, champagne glasses forgotten, whispering like a Greek chorus. She had an audience. She had to act fast. "Alejandro, please, you're not yourself," she projected, raising her volume so the peanut gallery could hear, slipping seamlessly into the victim role. "I know work has been stressful, but look at this mess you've made. You've terrified Elena." She gestured vaguely. "The poor girl was having a mental breakdown. She tried to steal the silverware, and I had to stop her. I was just trying to protect our home." The lie was so smooth, so instant, that for a split second Alejandro felt a sick sort of awe at her manipulative genius. Elena gasped, shaking her head wildly. "Liar!" the housekeeper screamed, finding her voice through the tears. "Sir, she has the key in her dress. Leo is downstairs." Hearing the boy's name snapped the last thread of Alejandro's restraint. He ignored Carla, ignored the gaping guests, and stormed toward his fiancée. Delicacy was off the table. Alejandro grabbed her wrist with his good hand, his grip like iron. "The key!" he demanded, his gaze burning right through her with scorching intensity. "Let go! You're hurting me!" Carla whined, twisting in his grasp. "I don't know what you're talking about. The boy is asleep in his room." Alejandro didn't wait for the confession. He spotted the metallic glint tucked into the neckline of her designer dress. With a rough jerk, he reached in and ripped the small bronze key free, snapping the thin chain. Carla shrieked, more from the humiliation than the pain, and clutched her chest, stumbling back against the counter. "He's an animal," she screeched to her friends. "Call the police. He's lost his mind." Alejandro didn't even spare her a glance. He turned to Elena, squeezing her shoulder briefly, a silent, "You're safe now," before jamming the key into the basement lock. The mechanism turned with a sharp metallic click. Alejandro yanked the door open, and the smell of damp earth and darkness punched him in the face. "Leo!" he shouted into the black abyss. No answer, just the distant, hollow hum of the boiler. Alejandro didn't hesitate. He plunged down the stairs, stumbling in the pitch black, guided by pure instinct, his hands grazing the cold stone walls. At the bottom he fumbled for the switch, but the bulb was either blown or smashed. He whipped out his phone and hit the flashlight. The beam of white light sliced through the gloom, revealing a chaotic mess of old boxes and sheet-covered furniture. "Leo? Son, it's Dad." His voice cracked. Then he saw him. In the corner, behind a stack of rolled-up rugs, a small bundle was shivering. Leo was curled into a tight ball, face buried in his knees, hands clamped over his ears. The boy was rocking back and forth, humming a low, steady drone to block out the world. Alejandro dropped to his knees, his heart shattering in his chest. The floor was freezing. Leo was wearing nothing but thin pajamas. "Champ," Alejandro whispered, reaching out but stopping short, terrified of spooking him. "It's okay. It's over. Dad came for you." "The plane has landed." Leo stopped rocking. Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head. The harsh flashlight beam revealed a face streaked with dust and dried tears. His eyes, dilated from fear and the lingering fog of sedatives, adjusted to the light before miraculously locking onto Alejandro's face. "Dad?" The boy croaked, his throat parched. Alejandro dropped the phone and crushed him into a hug. It was a desperate, all-consuming embrace. Leo didn't stiffen up. This time, he clung to his father's neck with shocking strength, burying his face in a shirt stained with blood and sweat, sobbing with a relief no 6-year-old should ever have to understand. "Let's go up," Alejandro said, scooping him into his arms. Leo felt light, too light. "We're getting out of here." He climbed the stairs with steady purpose, carrying his son like the most precious treasure in the universe. Crossing the threshold back into the blinding kitchen light, the scene had shifted. Carla wasn't alone against the counter anymore. She was surrounded by her friends, crying crocodile tears while they comforted her, and she fussed with her dress. "I had to lock him away. Don't you see? He tried to sink his teeth into me," Carla sobbed, though her eyes remained suspiciously dry. "He's unstable, ladies. Alejandro refuses to accept reality. Paternal guilt has made him blind." Her diatribe choked off instantly as Alejandro emerged from the cellar darkness, cradling the boy. A heavy, judging silence suffocated the room. Leo recoiled from this brightness, burying his face in his father's neck, his pajamas smeared with grime and his hair matted with spiderwebs. He looked like a forgotten orphan, not the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire, causing Carla's friends to recoil in genuine horror. The visual evidence was undeniable. There was no feral child here, only a terrified little soul and a father ready to burn the world down for him. "Living room," Alejandro said, his voice possessing a glacial calm that was infinitely more terrifying than his earlier shouting. It wasn't a request, it was a decree. "Everyone! I'm not going anywhere with you," Carla hissed, scrambling to regain the upper hand. "Are you drunk? High? Look at what you're doing to the boy. You're smearing your own filth all over him. Hand him over, as his legal guardian in your absence." She lunged, clawing at Leo's leg. "Elena!" Alejandro called out, walking right through Carla as if she were a ghost, forcing the guests to part like the Red Sea. "Come here." The housekeeper wiped her eyes with her apron, straightened her spine, and marched behind him, passing Carla with her head held high for the first time in years. Carla stood there, jaw unhinged, watching her iron-fisted authority dissolve into mist. But the villain of this story wasn't ready to wave the white flag. Public humiliation was her greatest fear, and she refused to let it win. With a glare of concentrated venom, she stalked after the group toward the main hall, where the massive 85-inch screen loomed on the wall like a sleeping giant. The main hall, curated with exquisite taste and filled with fresh flowers costing a small fortune, had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Alejandro planted himself in the center of the room, directly beneath the cascading crystal chandelier. He gently lowered Leo onto the beige velvet sofa, a pristine piece of furniture Carla had always treated as a museum exhibit, forbidden to the boy. Leo shrank into the cushion, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked onto Elena. The housekeeper was at his side in a heartbeat, dropping to her knees on the expensive rug and grasping his hand. The boy exhaled, instantly soothed by the familiar texture of the rubber cleaning gloves she had forgotten to remove. Or perhaps Chucky Hosi Mai Percy. Cheers. So Saruti. Ansaninum. It does say me. More. Carla's entourage, 5 women of the local elite, stood in an awkward semicircle, torn between fleeing the scene and witnessing the train wreck. Morbid curiosity kept their heels rooted to the floor. Carla stormed into the room, eyes bloodshot and manic, her mask of elegant composure shattered. She was a cornered animal now. "Enough of this theater!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Alejandro. "Get out of my house, all of you! This is a private family matter. Alejandro is having a psychotic break. Just look at him. He's filthy, bleeding, delusional." Alejandro met her hysteria with an exasperating tranquility. He wiped a smear of blood onto his trousers and pulled his phone from his pocket. "Nobody leaves," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute command. "At least, not until you see exactly why my son was rotting in a cellar while you all sipped champagne." Alejandro strode toward the television, and realization hit Carla like a physical blow. Her eyes darted to the hidden lens concealed within the picture frame above the fireplace, a detail she had ignored 1,000 times. The blood drained from her face. "Don't you dare!" Carla screeched, launching herself at him to snatch the phone. "That's illegal! You can't record me in my own home!" But before she could reach Alejandro, Elena rose. It was a fluid, lightning-fast motion. The servant, the invisible woman, placed herself squarely in the path of the lady of the house. "Do not touch him," Elena said. She didn't shout, but her voice was forged from steel. Carla froze, incredulous. The sheer audacity blinded her with rage. "You?" Carla hissed, spittle flying from her lips. "You dare give me orders? You're a starving beggar I plucked from the gutter. Move, or I swear I'll kill you." Carla raised her hand again, this time closing it into a fist, ready to smash Elena's face and unload all her frustration on the weakest link. "Mommy, no!" The scream didn't come from Elena. It came from the sofa. It was Leo. The boy had scrambled up onto the cushions. He wasn't crying out for Carla. He was screaming to protect Elena. Carla froze with her fist suspended in midair, turning her gaze of pure hatred toward the child. "You little monster," she muttered. "This is all your fault. If you were normal, none of this would be happening. You should have died with your mother." The sheer cruelty of the statement drew a collective gasp from the guests. "Shut up!" Alejandro snapped the cable into his phone with a sharp click. The giant screen flared to life, but Carla snapped. In a final fit of madness, she didn't lunge for Alejandro, she went straight for Leo. If she grabbed the boy, she held all the cards. Using him as a human shield was the only way to stop Alejandro dead in his tracks. "Get over here!" she shrieked, clawing violently at Leo's arm, trying to yank him off the couch. Leo screamed in pain. Elena reacted on pure instinct. She threw herself at Carla, body-checking her hard. Thrown off balance by her heels and the blindside hit, Carla stumbled back and crashed right through the glass coffee table, shattering it to smithereens under her weight. The crash was deafening. Carla lay sprawled among the jagged shards, dazed but furious, spitting venomous curses. Elena instantly planted herself in front of Leo, acting as a human barricade, chest heaving and fists clenched tight. "Nobody touches the child!" Elena roared with the ferocity of a mother bear. "Nobody!" Alejandro looked at Elena with profound, almost reverent respect. Then he turned his cold gaze to Carla's friends who were watching the scene in absolute horror. "You ladies want to know who your friend really is?" Alejandro asked, hitting play on his phone. "Watch the screen, don't look away." The TV flickered and resolved into a crystal-clear 4K recording. It was from just a few hours ago. There was Carla in the kitchen, laughing to herself with a glass of wine in one hand and a bottle of sedatives in the other. Her voice cut through the silence of the room with chilling clarity. "Once the ring is on and Alejandro hands over the reins, little Leo is getting shipped off to Switzerland. The cheapest boarding school I can find, even if I bill it as premium." Carla's friends gasped, hands flying to their mouths in shock. On the floor, amidst the broken glass, Carla went silent. She stared at the screen, paralyzed, watching her own voice sign her social death warrant. But Alejandro wasn't finished yet. "That was the fraud," he said, his voice ice cold. "Now watch the cruelty." He swiped across his phone screen. The video feed switched. Now it showed the interior of Leo's bedroom from the previous night. Carla barging in, forcing the child's mouth open, pouring the liquid down his throat and pinning him to the pillow while he struggled to breathe. You could see the sheer terror in the boy's eyes. You could hear her hiss, "Stay still, you little brat!" One of the guests started to sob openly. Another turned her back, too sickened to watch. "Shut it off!" Carla howled from the floor, slicing her hands on the glass as she scrambled to get up. "It's a setup, it's a deepfake. They're using AI to frame me." "No, Carla," Alejandro said, walking over and looking down at her like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "You destroyed yourself, and I have one final surprise for you." Alejandro gestured toward the front entrance. The red and blue lights of a police cruiser began strobing through the shattered living room windows. "I didn't call private security. I called the real authorities. Game over," Alejandro said. "Elena, take Leo. Take him to the garden. I don't want my son watching them take out the trash." The sirens cut out abruptly right outside, replaced by the heavy slam of car doors and authoritative voices barking commands. Inside the living room, the massive screen kept playing the nightmare on an endless loop. The grainy footage showed Leo trembling in the darkness of the basement, silently hitting the floor in despair. Carla's friends, women who just minutes ago were sipping champagne and discussing trips to Paris, were now pressing themselves against the walls, looking at their hostess like she was radioactive. Carla's social mask had completely crumbled. She lay on the floor surrounded by debris, makeup smeared, dress torn to rags. She didn't look like a high society queen anymore. She looked like exactly what she was, a cornered criminal. Two uniformed officers burst into the room, weapons at the low ready, scanning for threats. Behind them strode a man in plain clothes, badge on his belt, face weathered by years on the job. "Commander Ribas." Alejandro stepped forward, hands open and raised to show surrender, even though his shirt was still stained with his own blood and grime from the basement. "I'm Alejandro Montalvo, the homeowner," he said steadily, barely keeping the adrenaline from making him tear the place apart. "I made the call." Commander Ribas swept the room with a practiced eye, taking in the shattered glass in a second. The woman on the floor, the terrified guests, and most importantly, the housekeeper shielding the child on the sofa. His gaze finally locked onto the TV screen. "What am I looking at?" Ribas asked, pointing to the video. "Evidence," Alejandro replied, pointing a finger at Carla. "False imprisonment of a minor, aggravated physical abuse, financial fraud, and administration of controlled substances without a prescription." Carla struggled to rise. She braced herself against the shattered table, blood oozing from the shallow scratches on her palms. Her self-preservation instinct kicked into overdrive. "Officer, thank God you're here!" she screamed, leveling a trembling finger at Alejandro. "He's psychotic. Look what he did to me. It's a setup. That footage is a deepfake, nothing but computer tricks. He's just trying to steal my inheritance. Do you know who I am? I'm Carla Velasco. My family built half the North. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The commander shifted his gaze to Alejandro, who stood in stoic silence. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the hard copy of the lab results he had downloaded to his phone. He had grabbed the document from his study just moments before coming downstairs. He extended it to the officer. "Toxicology screening from this morning," Alejandro stated, his voice ice-cold. "My 6-year-old son has enough sedatives in his system to drop a horse. Clinophenol, diazepam, and trace amounts of cumulative poison. Check her purse or that dress pocket. You'll find the key to the basement where she had him locked up 10 minutes ago. And if you toss the guest bathroom, you'll find the unmarked vials." Ribas scanned the paper, his brow furrowing. He glanced over at Leo, who was clinging to Elena, looking pale and hollow-eyed. Then he looked at Carla. All doubt vanished from his gaze. He signaled his team. "Cuff her!" Carla shrieked as an officer seized her arm, hauling her up from the floor with zero hesitation. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed through the silent room like a gavel strike. "Get your hands off me, you animal!" Carla screeched, kicking wildly. "I'm calling my attorney." "I'll have your badges for this. Alejandro, tell them to stop. I'm your son's mother." "You aren't a mother to anyone." Alejandro stepped into her personal space, his face inches from hers. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble. "You're a parasite. And I promise you, Carla, I will spend every dime I have to ensure you rot in a 3x3 cell for the rest of your youth. No luxuries, no friends, no way out." Desperate, Carla scanned the room, pleading with her eyes for support from her so-called soul sisters. "Help me," she begged them. "Say something. You all saw him attack me." The blonde, dripping in jewels, the one who had mocked the package earlier, averted her gaze. She pulled out her phone, not to call a lawyer, but to live-stream the arrest. "Leave us out of this, Carla," she said with a sneer. "Drugs and child abuse? That's trashy, even for you. You make us sick." That final betrayal shattered whatever composure Carla had left. She erupted into a stream of profanity, cursing everyone in the room and exposing the venomous creature she truly was as the officers dragged her toward the door. As she passed the sofa, Leo finally lifted his head. The boy turned to face her. The fear was gone from his eyes. In its place was nothing but silent curiosity. He watched the wicked witch in chains stripped of her power. "This is your fault, you little cripple!" Carla spat the words at the child as she was shoved forward. "I wish you died in that basement!" Commander Ribas forcefully shoved her through the exit, cutting off her tirade. "Get her out of here and get a forensics team to document that basement immediately. I want every inch photographed." Alejandro watched them haul away the woman who had nearly destroyed his world. He felt no pity. He felt no love. There was only a vast emptiness rapidly filling with an aching sense of relief. He turned to the guests, who stood frozen like statues. "Get out of my house," Alejandro commanded, pointing to the splintered doorway. "And if I see a single photo of this on social media, my lawyers will come for you as accomplices. You knew what was happening, and you laughed. Now get out." The women scrambled, tripping over their heels in a stampede to flee the crime scene like rats deserting a sinking ship. The living room was suddenly empty, save for the 2 officers guarding the entrance, Alejandro, Elena, and Leo. Silence reclaimed the space, but the oppression was gone. It was the clean, washed-out quiet that follows a violent storm. Alejandro stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. His hands, steady as stone during the confrontation, began to tremble. The adrenaline was crashing, making way for the crushing emotional reality. He looked down at his bloody knuckles, then to the black television screen, and finally, he turned his head toward the sofa. Elena was still there, kneeling on the glass-covered Persian rug, her arms wrapped tight around Leo. The housekeeper was shaking. With the immediate threat neutralized, the shock was beginning to set in. This humble woman, who depended on this paycheck to survive, had just assaulted her boss's fiancé. She had disobeyed direct orders and placed herself at the center of a major police scandal. Logic told her she had acted with honor, yet a cold panic whispered that she had just completely destroyed her own life. "Mr. Alejandro," Elena breathed, eyes fixed on the floor as she gently released her hold on little Leo. "I'll go pack my bags immediately. I am so sorry about the mess. The broken table, the screaming. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll slip out the back door so the police don't—" Alejandro just stared at her, his mind reeling. Leave? This woman had just snatched his son from the jaws of death. She had thrown herself between a predator and a defenseless child, absorbing every vile curse and physical threat meant for him. And here she was, begging forgiveness for some shattered furniture. "What?" Alejandro moved toward her, his leather shoes grinding against the shards of glass scattered across the rug. Elena flinched, misreading his approach as the final step before being kicked out on the street. You don't have to pay me for the week, sir. I know this is a huge hassle. Just let me leave. Alejandro didn't just kneel. He collapsed. It wasn't a graceful motion. His knees slammed into the hardwood, indifferent to the jagged crystal biting through the fabric of his slacks. Suddenly, he was right there, eye to eye with Elena and Leo. For the first time in history, the untouchable tycoon occupied the exact same space as his domestic help. "Elena, look at me," he choked out, voice fracturing under the weight of tears he could no longer hold back. She glanced up, terrified, only to find Alejandro's gaze burning with a gratitude so intense it was almost painful to witness. "You are not going anywhere," Alejandro declared, reaching out to grasp her hands. He held those rough, work-worn fingers, still encased in bright yellow rubber gloves, an image that was simultaneously absurd and deeply heroic. "You saved my boy. You saw the danger I refused to acknowledge. You stood as his shield when I was too blind to see the truth. If anyone needs to beg for forgiveness in this room, it's me." Alejandro released her grip and turned his desperate gaze toward Leo. His son studied him with a newfound clarity. That hazy, drugged glaze was finally gone from his eyes. In its place was recognition and a silent, piercing judgment. "Leo." Alejandro extended a trembling hand, terrified the boy would recoil. He knew he deserved it. He had allowed that predator into their sanctuary. "Forgive me, champion. Daddy was a fool. Daddy failed to keep you safe. But I swear to you on your mother's memory, no one will ever hurt you again. You will never feel fear in your own home as long as I draw breath." Leo stared at his father's outstretched hand, then shifted his gaze to Elena. She offered a tearful smile and a small nod, a silent permission slip, granting safety. And that was the moment everything changed. Leo slipped from Elena's embrace. He didn't crawl. He planted his feet on the carpet. He swayed, legs still numb and weak, but he stood tall, one step toward Alejandro, then another. "Dad! Daddy!" Leo's voice rang out crystal clear. The boy launched himself forward, and Alejandro caught him mid-air, crushing him against his chest with desperate strength, burying his face in the boy's tiny neck and weeping with abandonment. He felt Leo's small arms wrap around his neck, squeezing tight, offering comfort to the broken man. This wasn't the fragile embrace of a sick child. It was the grip of a survivor. "You're here. You're really here," Alejandro murmured over and over, rocking him back and forth. Elena watched the reunion, feeling like a trespasser in a holy moment, yet rooted to the spot. She was drained, hollowed out yet filled with a strange glowing warmth. Slowly, she peeled off the yellow gloves, discarding them on the wreckage of the coffee table. They were the uniform of her past, the skin of her submission, now cast aside. Alejandro lifted his head, Leo still anchored to his hip, and locked eyes with her. "Elena," he said, wiping his wet face with the back of his hand, "first thing tomorrow, my legal team is drafting a new agreement. You are done scrubbing floors. No more uniforms. I want you to be Leo's legal guardian. I want you living here with us. Not as staff, but as family. I want him raised by the only person who had the courage to love him when the rest of the world turned away." "Sir, I don't have a degree. I don't know the first thing about being a governess," she stammered, completely overwhelmed. "You taught him how to laugh again," Alejandro said, rising to his full height with Leo secure in his arms. "That is worth more than any diploma on earth. Please, don't leave us, we need you." From the safety of his father's hold, Leo reached out a tiny hand toward Elena, fingers splayed in invitation. "Elena," the boy chirped. Elena dissolved into tears again, but the terror was gone. Unable to speak, she simply nodded and clasped Leo's small hand. The three of them stood in a tight circle amidst the debris of the living room, a nucleus of pure humanity surrounded by wreckage. Beyond the windows, the night was pitch black, but inside these walls, for the first time in years, it felt like the sun was finally rising. The nightmare brought by that woman was finished. The long road to healing had officially begun. Alejandro looked at his son and the woman who had saved them both. He realized that while he had lost a fiancé and his social standing among the elite, he had gained something priceless. He had been gifted a second chance to actually be a father. "Let's get some sleep," Alejandro whispered softly. "But not here. We're going to a hotel." This house needed to be purged of its ghosts. The three of them walked out the front door, leaving behind the shattered glass, the yellow rubber gloves on the table, and the fading wail of sirens, stepping into a future that was unwritten, but finally free. 6 months is usually just a blip on the radar, but for the Montalvo family, the last 180 days felt like an entire lifetime of healing compressed into a single season. The mansion, which once stood as a frigid shrine to isolation and neglect, had completely shifted its vibe. It wasn't just a remodel, though the hostile, sharp-edged furniture and dangerous glass surfaces were long gone, swapped out for sprawling, soft sofas and deep, fluffy rugs that practically begged you to lie down on them without fear. The real change hung in the air itself. The place no longer reeked of industrial bleach and the sharp perfume of a heartless woman. Now, the rooms breathed with the scent of fresh-baked bread, aged cedar, cracked spines of old books, and actual life. Alejandro leaned against the wooden railing of the terrace, watching the late afternoon sun bruise the horizon in shades of burnt orange and deep violet. He'd finally ditched the three-piece suit he used to wear like a suit of armor against the world. Now, clad in loose linen trousers and a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, he looked years younger. It wasn't that the wrinkles were gone. In fact, the grueling months of court dates and therapy sessions had dusted his beard with silver, but the permanent scowl etched between his brows had finally smoothed out. His mind drifted back for a second, to the gavel coming down, a memory that still carried a bitter but necessary aftertaste. He pictured Carla as she appeared in the courtroom just 2 weeks ago. She was no longer the imposing socialite who ruled charity galas with an iron fist. Draped in a drab inmate's uniform, face scrubbed clean of makeup, hair dull and eyes hollow, she looked like a shadow of the woman she used to be. The verdict had been brutal. 15 years solid time, no possibility of parole, for aggravated child abuse, drugging a minor, and massive fraud. The judge didn't hold back, especially after the footage played in open court. Carla's so-called friends threw her under the bus to save their own skins, and the high society she worshipped dropped her faster than a bad stock. Justice was served, sure, but the real victory didn't happen in front of a jury. The real victory was unfolding right now, just a few yards from where Alejandro stood. "Dad, check this out!" Leo's voice cut through the air, clear and bright as a church bell. Alejandro turned, that wave of disbelief hitting him again. He still wasn't used to hearing his son speak in full, fluid sentences. Down in the garden, the very spot where this nightmare began, Leo was sprinting after a soccer ball. That red wheelchair wasn't gathering dust in the corner anymore. It had been shipped off to a donation center the minute the doctors confirmed the muscle atrophy wasn't permanent. Leo had filled out. His cheeks were flushed with healthy color, and his eyes sparked with a hunger to learn everything he'd missed. Getting clean had been a journey through hell. Fevers, shakes, night terrors, screaming for the medicine, but they didn't walk that path alone. Alejandro's gaze shifted to the woman running alongside the boy. Elena. She was a different person too. The synthetic blue maid's uniform and those yellow rubber gloves were gone, burned in the bonfire of their past life. She wore a simple floral dress, hair loose and wavy, looking absolutely radiant. Alejandro had made good on every promise these last 6 months, and then some. Elena wasn't just Leo's legal guardian now. She was pulling straight A's in child psychology classes, proving that her brilliant mind was wasted scrubbing floors. But degrees aside, she had become the heart and soul of this home. She stole the ball with a laugh, skillfully passing it back to the boy. "Nice one, Leo," she cheered. "Now blast it into the goal." Leo focused, the tip of his tongue sticking out in pure concentration, and booted the ball with everything he had between the 2 trees serving as posts. "Goal!" the kid screamed, throwing his arms up, mimicking the strikers he watched on Sunday broadcasts with his dad. Alejandro skipped down the terrace steps, the cool grass greeting his bare feet. Spotting him, Leo abandoned the game and charged, tackling his legs. Alejandro scooped him up effortlessly, spinning him around until the air was filled with nothing but laughter. That laugh, it was the exact same joy that had pulled them both back from the edge 6 months ago. "You're a legend, Leo," Alejandro murmured, pressing a kiss to his son's damp forehead. "Coach thinks you're the speedster of the squad, says it's all thanks to Elena's training." Leo pointed a finger at her, face deadly serious. "She's super fast. She said she learned by sprinting so she wouldn't miss the bus." Alejandro locked eyes with Elena, sharing a quiet, knowing smile, a look heavy with an intimacy that had bloomed slowly, built over morning coffees, homework sessions, and whispered talks long after Leo had drifted off. This wasn't some Hollywood whirlwind romance. It was grounded, constructed brick by brick on mutual respect and shared gratitude. Alejandro had been forced to forgive himself for his past ignorance, for the times he hadn't seen what was right in front of him. And Elena had to learn to trust that a man with power wasn't necessarily like the monsters who had belittled her before. "I suspect Elena has a whole list of hidden talents. Alejandro said, setting the boy down on the grass. "Why don't you run to the kitchen and grab some water, champ? Elena and I need a quick word." Leo studied them both with that sharp, piercing intuition found in children who have weathered storms. He grinned, a cheeky look that suggested he knew exactly what was up, and bolted toward the house shouting, "I'll bring lemonade for everyone." The silence that settled over the garden wasn't heavy. It hummed with electricity. The sun was dipping low, bathing Elena in a golden hour glow that made her look like something divine walking the earth. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight nervously and staring at the flower beds she had brought back to life herself. "The lawyer rang today," Alejandro said, shattering the quiet as he took a step closer. "Oh," Elena's head snapped up, worry etched on her face. "Is it the custody arrangement? Did Carla file an appeal?" "No." Alejandro shook his head gently. "Quite the opposite. Full custody is mine, irrevocable, and the restraining order is permanent. He called about something else, actually. Your employment paperwork." Elena's expression darkened, just a shade. Her job status had always been a gray area. Alejandro wrote generous checks for her tutoring, but it felt wrong to put a price tag on her love for Leo. "Oh, I see. If we need to tweak the terms, sir, Alejandro." "I need to change everything, Elena," he said, closing the distance between them. He was close enough now to catch the scent of her perfume, vanilla and fresh air, which had become his favorite smell on earth. "I'm tearing up the contract." The color drained from Elena's face. That old familiar panic of instability flared in her eyes. "Tear it up? Did I screw up? I thought Leo was making real progress. His grades are perfect, and the therapist said, "Elena, stop." Alejandro reached out and captured her hands. They were warm and soft now, the roughness of scrubbing floors long gone. "I'm not firing you. I'm setting you free. I don't want you on my payroll. I don't want to pay you to be here. It builds a wall, a hierarchy that doesn't exist anymore. I don't want it between us." "I don't get it," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alejandro exhaled, hunting for the right words. He had closed multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but this was the highest-stake negotiation of his life. "When I came home that day and saw you on the lawn with Leo, I didn't just see a nanny. I saw what this house was missing. I saw what my soul was missing. Over these last 6 months, you taught me how to be a dad. You showed me that wealth is garbage if you don't have someone to share the joy with. You saved me, Elena. You saved us both." Elena felt the sting of tears welling up. "You guys saved me, Alejandro. I had nothing. I was alone in the world. Leo gave me a reason to wake up." "Then stay," Alejandro said, his voice dropping to a husky, vulnerable register. "But not as a tutor. Not as the help. Stay as the lady of the house. Stay as my partner." Alejandro let go of one hand and reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a flashy diamond rock. He knew that wasn't her style. He produced a small velvet box and flipped it open. Inside lay a simple white gold pendant shaped like a tiny paper airplane. The symbol of that first day. The emblem of flight, Leo's first spoken word, the beginning of their freedom. "I'm not proposing marriage just yet. I know you need to finish your degree and find your own footing." Alejandro pressed the pendant into her palm. "But I am asking you to build a family with me. A real one. No contracts, just the three of us." Elena looked at the golden plane, then up at him. All her doubts, all the insecurities about her background and their different worlds, melted away before the raw honesty of a man who had learned to love again. "An airplane," she beamed, tears tracking down her cheeks. "So we can take flight together," he whispered. Elena's fingers tightened around the charm, her throat too tight for words, so she just nodded. Then she collapsed into him. Alejandro caught her, holding on tight, like a dying man finally tasting water in the desert. It wasn't rushed. Their kiss was a slow burn, sweet and heavy with the promise of everything that was about to begin. Forget the Hollywood gloss. This was raw. Two survivors of their own personal shipwrecks finally washing ashore together. "Ew, gross! You guys are kissing!" Leo's voice sliced through the moment, startling them apart into a fit of laughter. The kid stood framed in the patio doorway, balancing a tray where 3 glasses of lemonade teetered on the brink of disaster. There was no pain in his tone anymore. Just the playful sass of a 6-year-old watching his dad moon around like a lovesick teenager. "Get over here, you little heckler." Alejandro waved him down. Leo abandoned the tray on a patio table, miraculously without spilling a drop, and sprinted to wedge himself right between them. They stood there in a 3-way huddle in the middle of the lawn, bathed in the last dying light of the sunset. Alejandro looked down at his boy, healthy and beaming. Then at Elena, the woman who'd reignited his world. Life had a funny sense of humor. He'd wasted years chasing the bottom line, building empires, convinced that joy was something you purchased or built with marble and gold. But in the end, happiness didn't knock on the front door. It slipped in through the service entrance wearing a cheap uniform and yellow rubber gloves, proving that real wealth isn't a bank balance. It's the quiet moments you can't put a price on. Golden sunlight, a child's giggle, and the bone-deep knowledge that no matter what storms came next, they wouldn't face them alone. "You know what?" Leo piped up, eyes tracking the first stars blinking into existence. "I think we should hit the beach tomorrow. Elena's never even seen the ocean." Alejandro shot her a surprised look. "Seriously?" She shrugged, cheeks flushing pink. "I never really got out of the city much. The ocean was just a dream I saved for later." Alejandro grinned, a real ear-to-ear smile. "Well, pack your bags, future psychologist. Tomorrow, it's the beach. The day after, the mountains. We've got a lifetime to make up for everything we missed." As they strolled back toward the house, watching the warm glow of the windows flicker on, beckoning them into a place that finally felt like home, Alejandro realized this wasn't some fairy tale happily ever after. It was better. It was simply, they were brave, and they truly lived. The door clicked shut, locking out the night. The garden fell silent, the only witness to how a simple pair of yellow cleaning gloves had rewritten the destiny of 3 souls forever. The end.